The transport pod shook violently as it cut through the atmosphere of Thyros 7. Owen Reeves pressed his palms against the cold metal walls and tried not to think about what waited below. Through the small viewport, he could see swirls of green and purple cutting across vast stretches of forest. The Wild Zone, a place where the Galactic Council sent people they wanted to forget about 14 days ago. Owen had been a conservation biologist working on Outpost Meridian. His job was simple enough: monitor quarantined wildlife and ensure viral outbreaks stayed contained. Then he made the mistake of having a conscience. 3 injured animals were suffering inside the contamination zone, and protocol said to let them die. Owen broke through the barriers with nothing but a medical kit and determination that he saved those animals. He also exposed himself to a potential virus and caused a station-wide panic. The council reviewed his case for exactly 6 minutes before declaring him reckless and dangerous. His sentence was exile to the Wild Zone, a punishment reserved for the worst offenders. Most people preferred immediate execution. At least that was quick. The 4-armed Sethran guard who escorted him to the pod seemed almost sympathetic. "Humans always think they know better," she said, her translator turning her clicking sounds into flat words. "Your kind survived one brutal planet, and now you believe you can survive them all." Owen did not argue. Earth had its rainforests, its deserts, its frozen wastelands. Humanity learned to adapt or die in all of them. But Thyros 7 was different. The reports made that clear. Gravity shifted without warning, strong enough to crush bones or send you floating helplessly into the canopy. Plants released spores that made you see things that were not there. And then there were the night scales. The guard handed him a survival pack before sealing the pod. The longest anyone lasted in the zone was 3 days. You get a knife, fire starter, water tablets, and basic medical supplies. No weapons, no communication device. The council believes death should be natural. How kind of them, Owen muttered. The guard tilted her head in what might have been curiosity. "You do not seem afraid." "I am terrified," Owen admitted. "But fear does not change what happens next." Now the pod was screaming through the final layer of atmosphere. Warning lights flashed red across the control panel. Impact in 30 seconds. Owen braced himself against the harness and closed his eyes. The crash was worse than he imagined. Metal shrieked as the pod tore through branches and vines before slamming into soft ground near a river. The harness dug into his shoulders hard enough to bruise. Silence followed. Owen waited for his heartbeat to slow before unbuckling himself. The hatch opened with a hiss, and humid air rushed in, carrying smells of wet earth and something sweet like rotting fruit. He grabbed his survival pack and stepped out on alien soil. The forest was massive. Trees stretched upward with trunks wide as buildings, their bark covered in patterns that looked like scales. Purple moss hung from branches, glowing faintly in the dim light. The river beside his crash site ran clear but had an odd shimmer to it, like oil on water. Owen knelt and tested it with a purification tablet. Safe enough to drink, at least for now, that he took stock of his supplies. 1 knife with a fixed blade, waterproof matches, and a fire starter. 20 water purification tablets. A basic medical kit with bandages, antiseptic, and pain medication. No food. The council expected him to hunt or starve. Owen had about 4 hours until sunset. He needed shelter before dark. Using the knife, he cut branches and vines, weaving them together into a basic lean-to against a massive tree trunk. It would not stop a determined predator, but it gave him a defensible position with his back protected. He gathered dry wood for a fire, arranging it carefully before striking a match. As flames caught and grew, Owen felt the first flutter of hope. He was still alive. That was more than the council expected. The forest around him was quiet. Too quiet. No bird calls. No insect buzzing. Just the whisper of wind through leaves and the crackle of his fire. Owen knew that silence meant something was watching. Prey animals went quiet when predators were near. He was the new presence here, the unknown element, and everything in the zone was trying to decide if he was food or threat. Darkness came fast. One moment the sky was purple-gray twilight, The next, it was black except for bioluminescent patches on tree bark and floating spores that drifted like tiny stars. The temperature dropped enough that Owen was grateful for the fire. He fed it steadily, keeping the flames bright. Then the howling started. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, a sound that started low and rose to a pitch that made his teeth ache. Not quite a wolf howl, not quite a scream. Something in between that spoke of intelligence and hunger. Other howls answered from different directions. They were talking to each other, coordinating. Owen tightened his grip on the knife and added more wood to the fire. His survival training said to make noise, to appear large and threatening. But his instincts said something different. These were not animals acting on impulse. They were thinking creatures, and charging at them with false bravado would only prove he was stupid. So Owen sat by his fire and waited. Eyes began appearing at the edge of the light. Green eyes, yellow eyes, eyes that reflected the flames in pairs and trios. Shapes moved between the trees, too quick to see clearly. They circled his camp for hours, just outside the firelight. Watching, Owen stayed awake through the entire night. When dawn finally broke and the eyes disappeared back into the forest, he was exhausted but alive. Day 1 complete. The wild zone had not killed him yet. Owen's second day in the wild zone began with nausea. He was checking his water supply when the world tilted sideways. Not his balance. The actual ground shifted, gravity pulling him at a 45-degree angle toward a cluster of rocks. He dropped to his hands and knees, fighting the urge to vomit as his inner ear screamed that down was now diagonal. The shift lasted 90 seconds. When gravity returned to normal, Owen was sweating and breathing hard. He understood now why the mortality rate was so high. A shift like that near a cliff or river would be fatal. He needed to map these events, find a pattern if one existed. He carved a mark into the tree trunk beside his shelter. Dawn gravity shift. Duration 90 seconds. Direction southeast. It was basic record keeping, but it might save his life. With the immediate danger past, Owen focused on water and food. The river was his best resource, but he noticed something odd. In morning light, the water looked clear and clean. By midday, it had turned slightly cloudy with a yellowish tint. He tested both samples with purification tablets. Morning water was safe. Midday water showed chemical traces that might be toxic. The river itself was changing based on time or light exposure. He marked this in the tree as well. Fill water containers at dawn only. Food was harder. Owen set simple snares using wire from his survival pack, positioning them near what looked like game trails. The tracks were strange, showing claws and multiple legs, but the logic was the same as Earth. Animals followed paths of least resistance. While waiting for the snares to work, he tested plants carefully. Rub on skin, wait for reaction. Touch to lips, wait again. Tiny taste, then wait longer. Most plants here would probably kill him, but he only needed to find 1 or 2 that were safe. By noon, he had identified a fungus growing on tree bark that did not cause any reaction. It tasted like dirt and had the texture of rubber, but his body accepted it. Not ideal, but it was calories. The afternoon brought purple clouds drifting through the canopy. Owen recognized them immediately as the spore storms mentioned in the reports. He soaked a piece of cloth in water and tied it around his nose and mouth, breathing shallow through the fabric. The spores landed on his skin like pollen, causing slight tingling but nothing worse. Other creatures were not as prepared. Owen watched a 6-legged animal that looked like a mix between a deer and a lizard stumble into a clearing. Its eyes were wide and unfocused, head swinging at enemies that were not there. It bleated at shadows and charged at empty air. Within minutes, something massive grabbed it from the undergrowth and dragged it away. Owen only saw scales and claws before both animals disappeared. He added another note to his tree. Spore storms at midday. That cloth breathing filter causes hallucinations in local wildlife. The pattern was becoming clear. The zone was not random chaos. It had rhythms, cycles that could be learned. Survive long enough to understand them. And the place became less impossible. On day 3, Owen checked his snares and found success. A small creature about the size of a rabbit was caught, already dead. It had 4 eyes and scaled skin, but the meat underneath looked like muscle and fat. He cleaned it carefully, cooked it thoroughly over his fire, and ate the first real protein he'd had since landing. It tasted gamey but good enough. That evening, his routine changed. He was gathering firewood when he felt the sensation of being watched. Not the general awareness of forest predators circling at night, but focused attention from a single source. Owen turned slowly and saw it across the river, a night scale. The reports had not exaggerated. It was the size of a full-grown grizzly bear, built low to the ground like a wolf, but covered entirely in overlapping scales that shimmered black and deep blue in the fading light. Its head was elongated, almost reptilian, with 6 eyes arranged in 3 pairs down its skull. Each eye tracked him independently before focusing together with clear intelligence. The claws on its front limbs were as long as kitchen knives. Every survival instinct told Owen to run. Running from predators was usually stupid, but night scales were supposed to be different. They hunted anything warm-blooded and never stopped until their prey was dead. The longest recorded encounter was 40 seconds before the victim was torn apart, but the night scale was not attacking. It was sitting on its haunches across the river, watching him with the patience of something that did not need to rush. This was not hunger. This was curiosity. Owen made a decision that went against everything logical. He sat down on the ground, cross-legged, making himself smaller and less threatening. He kept his hands visible and empty. He did not stare directly at the creature, but watched it from his peripheral vision, the way you might regard a nervous dog. They stayed like that for over an hour. The night scale watching Owen. Owen watching the night scale. Neither moving, neither threatening. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in orange and purple streaks. Bioluminescent plants began to glow, and still they watched each other. Finally, the night scale stood. It moved with liquid grace despite its size, muscles shifting under scales. For a moment, Owen thought it would cross the river and end him. Instead, it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing between the trees without a sound. Owen released a breath he did not know he was holding. His hands were shaking. He had just survived an encounter that should have killed him, and the only explanation was that the night scale chose not to attack. These creatures were supposed to be mindless killers, but what he saw in those 6 eyes was anything but mindless. He carved a final note into his tree before returning to his shelter. Day 3. Night scale encounter. It watched but did not attack. Possible intelligence. The zone was still trying to kill him, but maybe, just maybe, it was also trying to teach him something. The night scale returned at dusk on day 4. Owen had been preparing his evening fire when he felt that same focused attention. He looked up, and there it was across the river in the exact same spot, watching him with those 6 intelligent eyes. Owen stopped what he was doing. He sat down again, hands visible, posture non-threatening. They repeated their silent observation, predator and human studying each other across moving water. After an hour, the night scale left just as it had before on day 5. It came earlier. Owen had been cleaning a fish-like creature he caught from the river when the night scale appeared. This time, Owen did something different. He cut a portion of the raw meat and placed it on a flat stone at the water's edge, then retreated to his camp. The night scale watched this entire process without moving. Owen did not wait to see if it took the offering. He went about his routine, building his fire and preparing his own meal. We glanced back an hour later. The meat was gone. Whether the night scale took it or something else did, he could not say. But he chose to believe that on day 6, he left a larger portion. On day 7, he left the best cut from his catch. Each time he retreated, each time the meat disappeared. They were building something, a pattern of exchange that felt almost like conversation. I'm not a threat. I offer food. I respect your space. By day 10. Owen's survival in the zone had shifted from desperate scrambling to methodical routine. He knew when gravity would shift and braced himself accordingly. He knew when spore clouds would drift through and prepared his breathing filter. He knew which plants were edible and which were poison. He knew where to set snares and where to avoid because something larger hunted there. The wild zone was still deadly, But it was becoming familiar that on day 14, everything changed. A spore storm rolled in worse than any Owen had experienced. The purple clouds were so thick they blocked out the sun, and his wet cloth filter was barely enough. His eyes watered, his skin burned where the spores touched, and his head started to feel light and disconnected. Owen stumbled toward the cave system he had discovered 2 days earlier. It was crude shelter, but better than open air. He made it inside, just as his vision started to blur at the edges. Hallucinations were setting in despite his precautions. He saw his family back on Earth, his colleagues at Outpost Meridian, all waving at him from the cave walls. Then he heard growling from deeper in the cave. Real growling. Not a hallucination that a creature emerged from the darkness. It was built like a badger but scaled like a reptile, with too many teeth and claws that scraped stone. Its eyes were wild and unfocused. The spores had gotten to it first, and now it was attacking anything that moved. Owen pulled his knife, but his hands were shaking from the spore exposure. The creature lunged, and he barely dodged, feeling claws rake across his side. Pain cleared his head for a moment. He slashed with the knife and connected, but the wound only enraged the creature further. They circled each other in the dim cave light. Owen was bleeding, vision swimming, fighting an opponent that felt no pain and operated on pure aggression. This was how he would die, not from starvation or gravity shifts or even night scales. From a rabid cave dweller, while poisoned by spores, the creature lunged again. Owen raised his knife to meet it. The night scale hit the creature like a rock slide. Owen barely processed what happened. One moment he was facing his death. The next there was a blur of black and blue scales, the sound of bones breaking, and the cave creature's growling cut off into silence. The night scale stood over the broken body, 6 eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Then it turned to Owen. He was pressed against the cave wall, clutching his bleeding side, completely defenseless. The night scale could kill him as easily as it killed the cave creature. Instead, it moved closer, each step deliberate and careful. Its breath smelled like copper and meat. It leaned in, sniffing the wound on Owen's side. Owen was too weak and too poisoned to run. He just waited for whatever came next. The night scale made a sound, not a growl, but something softer, almost questioning. Then it did something that defied everything the Galactic Council believed about these creatures. It lay down beside Owen. Its massive scale body blocked the cave entrance, forming a wall between him and anything else that might wander, and Owen's mind could not process this. Night scales were apex predators, killing machines, incapable of anything but violence. Yet here one was choosing to protect him instead of eating him. His vision was fading as blood loss and spores combined to pull him under. His last clear thought was that the meat offerings had meant something after all. The night scale had not just taken food from a stranger. It had recognized an offering of respect, and now it was returning that respect in the only way it knew how. Owen passed out with his hand resting against warm scales. When he woke hours later, weak and feverish, the first thing he saw was daylight filtering into the cave. The second thing was the night scale, still lying beside him, awake and watchful. The third thing was his wound, which had been cleaned somehow and wrapped in plant fibers he did not remember gathering. The night scale noticed him stirring. It stood, stretched like a cat, and made that soft, questioning sound again. Then it walked to the cave entrance and looked back at Owen as if to say, "Are you coming?" Owen forced himself to stand, legs shaking, side burning with pain. He followed the night scale out into daylight and saw a fresh kill lying near his camp. Food. The creature had hunted for him. Owen sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the impossibility of what was happening. The wild zone had sent its deadliest predator to meet him, and somehow, against all logic and all understanding, they had chosen each other. Recovery took 5 days. Owen spent most of that time in the cave, treating his wound and regaining strength. The night scale stayed close, leaving only to hunt and returning with fresh kills. Owen began calling it Shadow, not because he thought it understood names, but because he needed something to call his unlikely companion. Shadow did not behave like a pet or servant. It moved with absolute independence, coming and going as it pleased. but it always returned, and it always checked on Owen with those intelligent six-eyed stares. They were not master and animal. They were something else entirely. On the sixth day, Owen felt strong enough to move around. Shadow watched him test his balance and seemed to approve when he managed to walk without stumbling. Together they returned to Owen's original camp by the river. The lean-to shelter was still standing, and his carved notes on the tree trunk remained unchanged. Owen added a new note. Day 19. Bonded with Nightscale. Name Shadow. Partnership. That evening, they shared a meal. Owen cooked his portion over fire while Shadow ate raw meat from its kill. They sat on opposite sides of the flames, and Owen realized how strange this would look to anyone from the Galactic Council. A human in a Nightscale, the zone's most feared predator, sharing space like old friends. You saved my life, Owen said, knowing Shadow could not understand the words but feeling the need to say them anyway. I do not know why, but thank you. Shadow tilted its head, eyes reflecting firelight. Then it made that soft sound again, the one that was almost a purr. Communication without language. Understanding without words. Over the following weeks, they developed a routine. Owen would rise at dawn, check his water and food supplies, and tend the fire. Shadow would disappear into the forest to hunt, sometimes for hours, sometimes for a full day. But it always came back. They began exploring together. Shadow led Owen to parts of the zone he would never have found on his own. A grove where fruit grew that was safe to eat and tasted like sweet citrus. A spring where water bubbled up clean and cold at all times of day. A network of caves that stayed stable even during gravity shifts. Owen documented everything in carvings and scratches on trees. He was building a map of the zone, a guide to survival that would have been impossible without Shadow's knowledge. The Nightscale knew this place like Owen knew Earth's forests. It understood the patterns, the dangers, the safe routes that, in return, Owen shared fire and cooked food. Shadow seemed fascinated by flames, watching them for long periods with unblinking focus. One night, Owen cooked a piece of meat and offered it to Shadow on a flat stone. The Nightscale sniffed it, considered, then ate. Its eyes widened slightly, and it made a pleased rumbling sound. After that, Shadow would occasionally bring portions of its kills to Owen for cooking. Not all the time, and not with any sense of dependence. Just sometimes, as if it wanted to try this new way of eating that its human companion preferred. They also began hunting together. Owen would track prey using signs and trails, moving quietly through undergrowth. Shadow would circle around, using its natural stealth to get into position. When Owen gave a signal, a sharp whistle, Shadow would drive the prey toward him. Owen would set snares or use his knife. The partnership was efficient and effective. Other creatures in the zone learned to avoid them. Owen noticed that predators no longer circled his camp at night. The eyes in the darkness stayed further away. Shadow's presence was a warning to everything else. This human was claimed, protected, part of a pack. One evening, as they rested near the river, Shadow did something unexpected. It approached Owen and pressed its massive head against his leg. Not roughly, but with clear intention. Owen froze, unsure what this meant. Then he realized Shadow wanted touch, wanted physical contact as proof of their bond. Slowly, carefully, Owen rested his hand on Shadow's scaled head. The creature rumbled deep in its chest, a sound of contentment. They stayed like that until the stars came out, human and Nightscale, connected by something the galaxy had never imagined possible. By day 40, Owen had changed. His body was lean and hard, muscles built from constant movement and survival. His senses were sharper, able to detect gravity shifts seconds before they happened, to smell spore storms on the wind, to hear the different calls of various predators. He moved through the zone with confidence, no longer a stumbling exile, but something that belonged here. Shadow had changed too, or perhaps Owen simply understood it better. The Nightscale was not a mindless killer. It was curious and intelligent, capable of planning and communication. It had a sense of humor, sometimes bringing Owen strange objects like colorful stones or odd plants, as if testing whether he would react. It had preferences and moods. Some days it wanted company, other days it wanted solitude. They respected each other's boundaries. Owen never tried to command Shadow, and Shadow never demanded obedience from Owen. They were partners by choice, remaining together because they wanted to, not because they had to point one night during a particularly violent gravity shift that sent loose objects flying. Shadow moved close to Owen and used its body to shield him from tumbling rocks. When the shift ended, Owen was bruised but unbroken. He looked at Shadow and saw something in those 6 eyes that he recognized because he felt it too. Trust. Complete and absolute trust. The wild zone had been designed to kill him through isolation and brutality. Instead, it gave him a companion more loyal than any he had known in civilized space. Shadow was not a pet or a tool. Shadow was a friend, a partner, an equal. Owen carved one final note on his original tree before they moved their camp to a better location. Day 40. The zone did not break me. It made me whole. Together, they walked deeper into the forest, 2 apex predators moving as one, no longer fighting the wild zone, but living within it. 3 months into exile, Owen and Shadow had carved out a territory spanning roughly 50 square kilometers. They knew every cave system, every water source, every dangerous area to avoid. Owen had survived 4 major spore storms, countless predator encounters, and gravity shifts that would have killed him in his first week. He was no longer the man the council had exiled. That person was gone, replaced by something harder and more aware. Then the drones arrived. Owen spotted them first, small metallic shapes hovering at canopy level, moving in coordinated search patterns. Military-grade observation drones, the kind the council used for reconnaissance. They were scanning the forest, recording everything, and Owen knew exactly what they were looking for. Confirmation that he was dead, so they could close his file and forget about him. Shadow noticed the drones too. It growled low, hackles raised, scales bristling. The night scale recognized threat even in unfamiliar forms. Owen placed a calming hand on Shadow's shoulder. Easy. They cannot hurt us from up there. They're just watching. But Owen knew what came next. If the drones reported him alive after 3 months, the council would want answers. They would send people to investigate, and those people would be armed and dangerous. He was right. 1 week later, a drop pod screamed through the atmosphere and crashed into a clearing 2 kilometers from Owen's camp. He and Shadow watched from high ground as 6 figures emerged wearing protective environmental suits and carrying weapons that could level half the forest. The team consisted of a mix of species. 2 Sethran guards with 4 arms each, gripping rifles designed to stop charging predators. A Hallan scientist carrying scanning equipment. 3 support crew managing supplies and communication gear. They moved with the confidence of people who believe technology made them superior to their environment. Owen recognized the arrogance immediately. They were treating the zone like an obstacle to overcome rather than an ecosystem to respect. Their landing had destroyed valuable plants. Their equipment was loud enough to disturb every creature within a kilometer. They set up camp in a low area that would flood during the next rain cycle. They will be dead in 3 days, Owen muttered. Shadow made a questioning sound. It wanted to leave, to avoid these intruders entirely. Owen understood the impulse. They had a good life here, balanced and sustainable. These outsiders only brought danger, but Owen thought about something else. If this team died, the council would send more. Eventually, they would send enough firepower to sterilize sections of the zone, destroying everything Owen and Shadow had come to value. The only way to protect this place was to teach these people how to survive it. Shadow clearly disagreed. It paced at the ridge line, agitated and tense. Owen had never seen it this disturbed. I know, Owen said softly, but if we do nothing, they will destroy everything. We have to try. Shadow stared at him with 6 eyes that communicated clear skepticism. Then, with obvious reluctance, it settled into a watchful crouch. Not agreeing, but not abandoning Owen either. That night, Owen observed the camp from the shadows. The scientist was the interesting one. She moved away from the group regularly, studying tracks and plant samples with genuine curiosity. She argued with the guards about their aggressive approach, suggesting that the zone might be understandable rather than just dangerous. Her name, according to the translator clips on her suit, was Dr. Hallis. The head guard was less promising. He barked orders and treated the environment like an enemy. He wanted to complete their survey and leave as quickly as possible. Owen heard him tell the others that any sign of the human exile would be reported, and if the human was dangerous or zone-touched, they had permission to eliminate the threat. Owen waited until dawn. He approached their camp slowly, hands visible and empty, moving with the careful confidence of someone who belonged in the zone. His appearance must have been shocking. Tan skin, scarred from various injuries, wearing clothes made from woven plant fiber and treated animal hides. His hair was longer, tied back with vine cord. He looked more like a forest creature than a council biologist. The guards nearly shot him. Rifles came up fast, targeting his chest. Owen stopped walking, but kept his hands visible. "My name is Owen Reeves," he said in Galactic Common, his voice rougher than it used to be. "I was exiled here 3 months ago. I'm offering to guide you safely through the zone in exchange for your agreement to leave it intact when you leave." Dr. Hallis pushed forward, ignoring the guards' protests. Her face behind the helmet visor showed pure excitement. "You survived? How?" "I learned the patterns," Owen said simply. "The zone is not random chaos. It has rules, rhythms. Respect them, and you can survive. Ignore them, and you will die, probably within a week." The head guard, who introduced himself as Commander Drell, studied Owen with suspicion. "Why help us?" "Because if you die here, the Council will send more people. Eventually, they will send enough force to damage this ecosystem permanently. I would rather teach you than fight you." Dr. Hallis was already nodding. "We accept. Our equipment has been malfunctioning, and we have encountered predators we cannot identify or defend against. Your knowledge would be invaluable." Commander Drell looked less convinced, but after a private discussion with his team, he agreed to a temporary arrangement. They needed help, and pride was worth less than survival. Owen began teaching them that same day how to recognize gravity shift warnings, when to filter breathing during spore storms, which plants were edible and which were deadly, where to set camp and where to avoid. The team absorbed the information with varying degrees of belief that Dr. Hallis was fascinated. The guards were skeptical. The support crew just wanted to survive. What none of them knew yet was that Shadow was watching from the forest, waiting to see if these intruders deserved the mercy Owen was offering. For 3 days, Owen guided the research team through the zone. He showed them how to read the signs that predicted gravity shifts, the subtle changes in air pressure and animal behavior that gave 30 seconds of warning. He taught them to recognize safe water versus contaminated water by color and smell. He explained the spore storm cycles and demonstrated the wet cloth breathing technique that prevented hallucinations. Dr. Hallis documented everything with barely contained excitement. She asked endless questions about plant life, predator behavior, and how Owen had survived so long. The guards remained wary, but admitted privately that the humans' knowledge had already saved them twice from situations that would have been fatal. Commander Drell still suspected Owen was hiding something, but he could not argue with results. The team was healthier and safer than they had been since landing. On the 4th day, everything changed. They were moving through a dense section of forest when Owen heard the familiar clicking sounds of scaleback hunters. He recognized them immediately, a pack of mid-level predators that hunted in groups of 5 to 7. Dangerous, but manageable if you knew how to respond. The team did not know how to respond. They saw movement in the undergrowth and panicked. Commander Drell shouted orders to form a defensive circle. Guards raised their rifles. The support crew screamed. Their fear sent waves of scent into the air, marking them as prey. The predators moved closer, emboldened by the panic. Owen could see at least 6 of them now, circling with coordinated precision. In seconds, this would become a bloodbath. "Lower your weapons," Owen said firmly. "Stand still and be quiet." "Are you insane?" Commander Drell hissed. "We need to defend ourselves. You need to listen to me, or you will all die." Before anyone could argue further, Shadow emerged from the tree line. The reaction was immediate and primal. Dr. Hallis gasped. The support crew scrambled backward. Commander Drell and his guards swung their rifles toward the night scale, fingers on triggers, ready to fire at the creature from their worst nightmares. "Do not shoot," Owen said, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. He walked calmly to Shadow's side and rested his hand on the night scale's shoulder. The silence that followed was absolute. 6 intelligent eyes swept across the research team, evaluating each member. The smaller predators that had been circling vanished into the forest immediately. The hierarchy was clear. A night scale claimed this territory, and everything else knew to retreat. Owen turned to face the team. "This is Shadow. We have been partners for 3 months. Shadow is not going to hurt you unless you give it a reason to." Dr. Hallis found her voice first. "That is impossible. Night scales are documented as exclusively aggressive. They attack anything warm-blooded on sight. There are no exceptions in the records. The records were written by people who came to the zone with weapons and fear," Owen replied. "They treated night scales as mindless killers, so that is what they received. I came with respect and patience." Shadow responded in kind. He explained the gradual process of their bond, the watching across the river, the offering of food, the mutual protection during the spore storm, the slow building of trust through actions rather than words. Dr. Hallis listened with the intensity of someone watching their entire understanding of xenobiology rewrite itself in real time. "This changes everything," she whispered. "If night scales are capable of partnership and communication, then the entire classification of this zone as an execution ground is wrong. This is not a killing field. This is a complex ecosystem with intelligent apex predators." Commander Drell lowered his rifle slowly. He looked at Owen with something approaching respect. "You bonded with the zone's deadliest predator. You did not just survive here. You thrived. The zone was never trying to kill me," Owen said. "It was testing me, seeing if I could adapt, if I could learn, if I deserved to be here. Earth prepared humanity for places like this. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day, and we learned to work with it instead of against it. That is what I did here." Over the next 2 days, the team witnessed the full extent of Owen and Shadow's partnership. They watched the two hunt together, communicating through gestures and sounds. They saw Shadow bring food and Owen shares fire. They observed the careful respect each showed the other, the lack of dominance or submission, just mutual cooperation between equals. Dr. Hallis recorded everything. She asked permission to take samples and measurements, which Owen granted only after Shadow examined her equipment and seemed satisfied it was not a weapon. The night scale was protective, but not unreasonably so. When the extraction ship arrived to take the team home, they offered Owen a place on board. Commander Drell even suggested the council might pardon him given what he had accomplished. Owen refused without hesitation. "This is my home now," he said, standing beside Shadow in the clearing where the ship had landed. "The council sent me here to die, and in a way I did. The person they exiled is gone. What remains belongs to the zone." Dr. Hallis stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I will make sure they understand what you have done here. I will push to have the zone reclassified as protected territory. No more executions. No more destruction. That is all I ask." The team boarded their ship and lifted away, leaving Owen and Shadow alone once more. They stood together watching the vessel disappear into the sky, then turned back toward the forest. The wild zone stretched endlessly around them, deadly and beautiful and alive. Owen had been sent here as punishment, but he found purpose instead. He found partnership with a creature the galaxy feared. He found a place where humanity's greatest strengths, patience and adaptability, and the capacity to see intelligence in unexpected forms, finally had room to thrive. Shadow pressed against his side, and they walked back into their territory together.